The fork clattered against the ceramic plate as Antonio Rossi's hand began to shake uncontrollably. Sweat beaded across his forehead despite the restaurant's cool evening air. His chest tightened like a vice, each breath becoming shorter and more desperate. The sounds around him grew muffled, as if he were drowning underwater while the world continued above. At table 12 in Rossi's family restaurant, a man in an expensive navy suit was dying inside and nobody cared. The waitress walked past his table for the third time, her eyes deliberately avoiding his frantic gestures. He tried to wave, tried to signal that something was wrong, but she merely rolled her eyes and whispered to her colleague, "Another stuck-up customer who thinks he's too good to speak to the staff." Antonio's vision blurred. The pasta on his plate swam in and out of focus as his panic attack reached full force. He pressed his palm against his chest, hoping to slow his racing heart. 3 years ago he could have called out for help. 3 years ago he could have explained what was happening. But the car accident that stole his voice had also stolen his ability to connect with the world around him. A businessman at the next table glanced over with annoyance. "Some people have no manners," he muttered to his dinner companion. "Can't even say, 'excuse me,' when he's clearly trying to get attention." The elderly couple near the window shook their heads in disapproval. The woman in the red dress whispered, "Kids these days no respect. Probably expects everyone to read his mind." Antonio's breathing became more labored. His designer watch felt heavy on his wrist, a reminder of the wealth that couldn't buy him the one thing he needed most, a voice to ask for help. The restaurant, filled with warm conversation and clinking glasses, became a prison of isolation. He fumbled for his phone, hands trembling so violently he could barely grip it. The screen lit up, showing 17 missed calls from his assistant, 12 from his business partner, and 43 unread messages. All from people who wanted something from him, but none who would understand what he needed right now. The panic consumed him completely. His perfectly styled dark hair, now damp with perspiration, fell across his forehead. The Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly salary offered no comfort as his legs grew weak. He was a man who once commanded boardrooms with confidence, who built a tech empire worth hundreds of millions, now reduced to a silent figure gasping for air in a room full of strangers. The restaurant manager, a beautiful African-American woman in a bright green dress, moved efficiently between tables, ensuring every customer felt welcome. Her warm smile and gracious manner made everyone feel at home, everyone except the man at table 12 who couldn't speak his distress aloud. As Antonio's world closed in around him, as the walls of the restaurant seemed to press closer, as his breath came in shorter and shorter gasps, he closed his eyes and wished for just one person to understand. Just one person to see past his expensive clothes and silent demeanor to recognize that he was drowning in plain sight. The thought struck him with cruel irony. Surrounded by dozens of people, he had never felt more alone. Have you ever felt completely invisible when you needed help the most? If this story touches your heart, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means everything to stories like this. Sophie Thompson bounced in her bright red dress, her small hands moving gracefully through the air as she practiced the sign language she'd learned in her school's special program. At 7 years old, she possessed the curious nature that adults often lost, the ability to notice things others overlooked. "Mama, look what Mrs. Anderson taught us today," Sophie called to her mother, signing the words for friend and help with precise, tiny fingers. Gabrielle Thompson smiled while checking the evening receipts behind the hostess station. Managing Rossi's family restaurant kept her busy, but she always made time to watch her daughter's enthusiasm for learning. "That's wonderful, baby. Practice makes perfect." The restaurant hummed with typical dinner conversation, families sharing stories over plates of homemade pasta, couples enjoying intimate conversations over candlelight. But Sophie's attention kept drifting to table 12, where something seemed wrong. The man in the navy suit sat perfectly still, but his stillness felt different from the comfortable quiet of other diners. His shoulders moved too quickly, like he couldn't catch his breath. His hands gripped the edge of the table with white knuckles, and sweat glistened on his face despite the comfortable temperature. Sophie had seen this before. Last month, when her friend Jenny had an asthma attack on the playground, she looked exactly the same. Scared, struggling to breathe, unable to call for help. "Mama?" Sophie tugged on Gabrielle's green dress. "That man over there looks sick." Gabrielle glanced toward table 12, then back at her paperwork. "He's fine, sweetie. Some customers just prefer to eat quietly." But Sophie studied the man more carefully. His eyes darted around the room, seeking something or someone. His mouth moved slightly, like he was trying to speak but no words came out. She watched him attempt to wave at their waitress Monica, but Monica was annoyed and ignored him completely. I think he needs help, Sophie whispered. Before Gabrielle could respond, Sophie made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. She walked across the restaurant floor, her small red dress bright against the warm wood paneling, her confident steps carrying her toward the silent stranger. Antonio noticed the little girl approaching and tried to compose himself, not wanting to frighten her. But his panic attack was reaching its peak, and he couldn't hide his distress. Sophie stopped beside his table and looked directly into his frightened eyes. Without hesitation, she raised her small hands and began to sign. Are you okay? Do you need help? Antonio's eyes widened in shock. For 3 years, no stranger had tried to communicate with him in sign language. This child, this beautiful little girl in her bright red dress, was the first person to reach out in a language he could understand. His trembling hands lifted slowly and he signed back, hard to breathe. Scare. Thank you for noticing. Sophie's face lit up with understanding, not fear. She turned toward her mother and called out, Mama, he needs help. He can't talk but he's telling me with his hands that he can't breathe good. The entire restaurant seemed to shift. Conversations quieted as people turned to see what was happening. Gabrielle dropped her paperwork and hurried over, her heart racing as she saw the obvious distress of the man at table 12. But instead of panic, she felt a rush of pride watching her daughter's compassion in action. Sophie continued signing to Antonio. My mama will help you. She helps everyone. What's your name? Antonio, he signed back, tears now streaming down his face, but these were tears of relief, not fear. I'm Sophie, she signed with a bright smile. Everything will be okay now. For the first time in 3 years, Antonio believed those words might be true. Gabrielle Thompson had seen many situations in her 5 years managing the restaurant, but nothing quite like this. Her 7-year-old daughter stood confidently beside a table, hands moving in graceful sign language conversation with a clearly distressed customer who wore clothes that cost more than Gabrielle's monthly salary. Sophie, honey, come here, Gabrielle called gently, her natural protective instincts kicking in. But as she approached, she could see this wasn't a dangerous situation. The man looked grateful, not threatening. Sophie turned to her mother, still signing as she spoke aloud. Mama, this is Antonio. He can't talk with his voice, but he talks with his hands like Mrs. Anderson taught me. He was having trouble breathing, but he's getting better now. Gabrielle knelt beside her daughter and looked at Antonio with concern. Sir, do you need medical attention? Should I call an ambulance? Antonio shook his head quickly and pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. He turned the screen toward her. No ambulance needed. Panic attack. Your daughter's kindness helped more than any medicine. Thank you. The simple message touched Gabrielle's heart. She studied Antonio's face, seeing genuine gratitude rather than the entitled attitude she'd expected from his expensive appearance. His breathing had indeed calmed since Sophie began communicating with him. Can I get you some water? Or maybe some herbal tea? Gabrielle offered. Antonio typed again, water would be wonderful. I'm sorry for causing a scene. Sophie looked between her mother and Antonio, then signed to him. You don't need to be sorry. Everyone needs help sometimes. The wisdom from her young daughter always amazed Gabrielle. She signaled Monica to bring fresh water and settled into the chair across from Antonio. I'm Gabrielle, Sophie's mother and the restaurant manager. I'm glad she could help you. Antonio typed a longer message. I haven't met anyone outside my family who knew sign language in 3 years. Sophie is remarkable. You're raising an extraordinary daughter. She's always been special, Gabrielle replied, running her fingers through Sophie's curly hair. Her school has an inclusion program where all students learn basic sign language. She loves it. Monica arrived with ice water, looking embarrassed. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize you needed assistance. Antonio typed graciously, no problem at all. You couldn't have known. Gabrielle watched this exchange with interest. Many wealthy customers she'd encountered would have demanded an apology or complained to management. Antonio's gentle response spoke volumes about his character. Sophie climbed onto the chair next to Antonio and signed, Do you want to be our friend? Mama and I eat dinner here every night after work. You could eat with us if you want. Gabrielle started to intervene, worried her daughter was being too forward, but Antonio's face transformed. The fear and isolation she'd seen just minutes earlier melted away, replaced by something that looked like hope. He typed carefully, I would like that very much if it's okay with your mother. Gabrielle felt her heart soften. Of course. We usually eat at table 6 around 7 o'clock. It's quieter there. Antonio gathered his belongings, leaving his barely touched pasta, and moved to their usual table. Sophie bounced beside him, chattering about school, her friends, and everything else that popped into her mind. Gabrielle watched her daughter's natural ability to make anyone feel welcomed. As they settled at table 6, Antonio typed another message. I haven't enjoyed a conversation this much in years. Thank you both for your kindness. Gabrielle smiled. Everyone deserves kindness. That's what Sophie's teaching me every day. Sophie signed to Antonio. Will you teach me more signs? I want to learn everything so we can be better friends. Antonio's eyes misted again as he signed back. I would love to teach you. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. In that moment, surrounded by the warm atmosphere of the restaurant and the genuine care of a mother and daughter who barely knew him, Antonio felt something he hadn't experienced since his accident. He felt like he belonged somewhere. Gabrielle ordered Sophie's favorite chicken fingers and asked Antonio what he'd recommend. For the first time in 3 years, someone was asking for his opinion about something simple and normal. As they waited for their food, Sophie taught Antonio the signs for family and home. He realized, with a start, that these concepts might finally mean something to him again. 3 weeks later, Antonio Rossi had become as much a part of Rossi's family restaurant as the checkered tablecloths and the aroma of garlic bread. Every evening at 7 o'clock, he occupied table 6, his laptop closed, his phone silenced, completely focused on the two people who had become the highlight of his day. Sophie had appointed herself his sign language teacher, arriving each evening with new words to share. Tonight, she wore a bright blue dress that matched her enthusiasm as she taught him signs for different emotions. This is happy, she demonstrated, bringing her hands up to her chest with a gentle patting motion. And this is excited, and this is grateful. Antonio practiced each sign carefully, his businessman's precision applied to this new language. He signed back, I feel all three when I'm here with you and your mother. Gabrielle watched their interaction while reviewing inventory sheets. Over the past weeks, she'd noticed remarkable changes in both Antonio and Sophie. Her daughter had gained confidence in her signing skills and talked constantly about her special friend. Antonio had transformed from the panicked, isolated man she'd first met into someone who seemed to find joy in simple moments. Tell me about your work, Gabrielle asked Antonio as their dinner arrived. She'd been curious but hadn't wanted to pry. Antonio pulled out his phone and typed, I created a company that develops software for businesses. It became quite successful, but I lost interest after my accident. I still own it, but others run the daily operations now. What kind of accident? Sophie asked innocently, signing as she spoke. Gabrielle gently touched her daughter's hand. Sweetie, that might be too personal. But Antonio shook his head and typed, It's okay. 3 years ago, I was driving home from a business meeting. Another car ran a red light and hit me. I was in a coma for 2 weeks. When I woke up, the doctor said damage to my throat meant I might never speak again. Sophie's eyes widened with understanding. That must have been very scary. It was, Antonio typed. But the scariest part wasn't losing my voice. It was how people treated me differently afterward. Friends stopped calling because conversations became difficult. Business partners grew impatient with written communication. Even my family struggled to adapt. Gabrielle's heart ached for him. That's terrible. People should have been more understanding. Antonio typed, I stopped trying to connect with anyone. It seemed easier to be alone than to face the frustration and pity. Until 3 weeks ago, when a little girl in a red dress showed me that someone could still see me as a person worth knowing. Sophie beamed and signed, You're our friend. Friends help each other. Yes, they do, Antonio typed, then looked at Gabrielle. I've been thinking about that. This restaurant means so much to both of you, and I've noticed some things that could be improved. Gabrielle tensed slightly, hoping he wasn't about to criticize the place that had become their sanctuary. Antonio continued typing. The building needs some repairs. The kitchen equipment is older. I'd like to help with those improvements if you'd allow me. Oh no, we couldn't accept that, Gabrielle protested immediately. You're already a wonderful customer and friend. We can't take your money. Antonio typed quickly, Please don't refuse. This place saved me. Sophie, and you gave me a reason to leave my house to interact with people again. Let me give something back. Sophie looked between her mother and Antonio, then signed, Mama, remember what you always tell me about accepting help when it comes from love? Gabrielle paused, recognizing her own words. She taught Sophie to accept kindness graciously, but found it difficult to apply that lesson herself. The owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, has been struggling with repair costs, Gabrielle admitted quietly. Business is good but the building is old. She's been worried about some major expenses coming up. Antonio typed, then let me help. Not as charity but as an investment in the place that gave me my life back. Gabrielle studied his face, seeing only sincerity. Mrs. Rodriguez would have to agree to any major changes. Of course, Antonio typed. I'd like to meet her and discuss it properly. Sophie clapped her hands together. This is so exciting. Our restaurant will be even better, and Antonio gets to help because that makes him happy. In her 7-year-old wisdom, Sophie had summed up the situation perfectly. Sometimes accepting help was just another way of showing love. Gabrielle reached across the table and squeezed Antonio's hand gently. Thank you. Your generosity means more than you know. Antonio looked down at their joined hands, the first meaningful physical contact he'd had with another person since his accident. He typed with his free hand, no thank you. For the first time in 3 years I feel useful again. As the evening wound down, Sophie taught Antonio the signs for grateful, friendship, and tomorrow. Each word represented something he'd rediscovered in this simple restaurant booth, surrounded by the laughter and warmth of a family that had chosen to include him. Outside, his expensive car waited to take him back to his empty mansion. But increasingly, Antonio found himself wishing he could stay in this bright, noisy, welcoming place where being unable to speak didn't make him invisible. For the first time since his accident, he was beginning to understand the difference between being alone and being lonely. At table 6 in Rossi's family restaurant, surrounded by Gabrielle's gentle strength and Sophie's boundless love, he was learning to be alone without being lonely at all. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez had owned Rossi's family restaurant for 37 years, and in all that time, she'd never met anyone quite like Antonio Rossi. The quiet man in expensive suits had been coming every evening for a month, always polite, always generous with tips, and apparently able to communicate fluently with little Sophie Thompson through sign language. You want to do what? Elena asked, adjusting her reading glasses as she studied the written proposal Antonio had placed before her. Antonio typed on his phone, I want to invest in necessary repairs and improvements. New kitchen equipment, structural repairs, updated electrical and plumbing. Everything this beautiful restaurant needs to serve the community for another 37 years. Elena looked across the table at Gabrielle, who sat nervously beside them. They were meeting before the restaurant opened for lunch, the dining room quiet except for the sounds of Tommy Chin preparing ingredients in the kitchen. This is very generous, Mr. Rossi, but I don't understand why, Elena said carefully. What do you want in return? Antonio smiled and typed, I want nothing except to ensure this place continues to exist. Your restaurant saved my life, Mrs. Rodriguez. I'd like to save it in return. Saved your life. Elena repeated, glancing at Gabrielle for explanation. Gabrielle spoke softly. Antonio was having a panic attack when Sophie first met him. He hadn't been able to connect with people since his accident. This place and the friendships he's made here brought him back to the world. Elena studied Antonio's face, reading the sincerity she found there. After decades of running a business, she'd become good at judging character. Show me exactly what needs to be done. Antonio pulled out a tablet and showed detailed photographs and repair estimates. The roof needs replacement in 3 sections. The walk-in cooler is failing and could break down completely within months. 2 of your ovens are operating at reduced efficiency. The dining room could use fresh paint and updated lighting. This must cost a fortune, Elena whispered, scrolling through the comprehensive list. Money I've been sitting on for 3 years without purpose, Antonio typed. Please let me give it purpose. Elena's eyes misted. She'd been losing sleep for months, worried about how to afford necessary repairs on her limited budget. You're sure you want nothing in return? No partnership percentage, no control over operations. I want to be a customer who feels welcome here, Antonio typed. That's all I've ever wanted. Sophie bounced through the front door, still in her bright green school dress, backpack flying behind her as she rushed to their table. Antonio, are you really going to fix everything in our restaurant? He signed to her, only if your friend Mrs. Rodriguez agrees. Sophie looked seriously at Elena. Mrs. Rodriguez, Antonio is the kindest person I know. He taught me signs for generous, and gratitude, and community. I think those are good words for fixing restaurants. Elena laughed, charmed by Sophie's logic. Out of the mouths of babes. Tommy Chin emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. Elena, if this gentleman wants to fix our broken equipment, I say we let him. That oven has been threatening to quit for 2 years. Tommy's right, Gabrielle added. We've all been worried about major breakdowns. This is a blessing. Elena looked around the restaurant that had been her life's work. The faded paint, the outdated fixtures, the kitchen equipment held together with hope and prayer. She dreamed of improvements but never imagined they could become reality. "Mr. Rossi," she said formally, "I accept your generous offer with deep gratitude. But I insist on one condition." Antonio nodded for her to continue. "From now on you eat here free. Forever. It's the least I can do." Antonio started to protest, but Elena held up her hand. "No arguments. You want to invest in this place? Then you're family now. Family doesn't pay for meals." Sophie clapped her hands and signed excitedly, "Antonio is family now. This is the best day ever." Gabrielle felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Antonio's response to Sophie's declaration. His face showed wonder, as if the concept of belonging to a family was foreign but deeply desired. He typed slowly, "I haven't been part of a family in 3 years. Thank you for welcoming me home." Elena stood up and walked around the table to embrace Antonio, something that surprised everyone, including herself. "Welcome home, Mijo." Over the following weeks, Rossi's family restaurant transformed. Work crews arrived each morning after breakfast service ended, carefully updating and repairing while preserving the restaurant's warm character. Antonio supervised every detail, ensuring the improvements enhanced rather than changed the atmosphere everyone loved. The new kitchen equipment delighted Tommy, who immediately began experimenting with expanded menu options. Fresh paint and warm earth tones brightened the dining room without altering its cozy feel. Updated lighting cast a soft, welcoming glow over every table. "It's like a fairy tale," Sophie told Antonio one evening as they admired the completed work. "You're like a fairy godfather who made all the broken things beautiful again." Antonio signed back, "You're the fairy godmother, Sophie. You used magic words to save a lonely man and give him a family." Gabrielle watched their interaction with a full heart. Antonio's generosity had transformed more than just the restaurant. It had transformed all of them. Elena glowed with pride in her renewed establishment. Tommy whistled while cooking on equipment that actually worked properly. Sophie had gained confidence and a special friendship. And Gabrielle herself had discovered something unexpected: feelings for the quiet, generous man who'd become such an important part of their daily life. As she looked around the restored restaurant, filled with happy customers enjoying improved service and beautiful surroundings, Gabrielle realized that sometimes the most profound changes came not from grand gestures, but from small acts of kindness that grew into something larger than anyone could have imagined. Antonio's investment had saved the restaurant, but Sophie's compassion had saved the investor. Together, they created something that was greater than the sum of its parts. A place where everyone truly belonged. Spring arrived at Rossi's family restaurant with fresh flowers on every table and windows open to let in warm breezes. The renovations had been complete for 2 months, and the improved restaurant buzzed with happy customers who appreciated the enhanced atmosphere while preserving the homey feeling they'd always loved. Antonio arrived earlier each evening now, helping Sophie with homework at table 6 before dinner service began. Tonight, she struggled with a mathematics worksheet, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked through word problems. "This one doesn't make sense," Sophie said, pointing to a problem about calculating distance. "How can I figure out how far someone walked if I don't know which way they went?" Antonio studied the problem and began drawing a simple diagram on the back of her worksheet. He sketched a stick figure walking along different paths, showing how the same distance could be covered in various ways. Gabrielle watched from behind the hostess station, amazed by Antonio's patience and teaching ability. Over the past weeks, she'd observed him helping Sophie with everything from spelling words to science projects. His explanations were always clear and encouraging, never condescending or impatient. "I get it now," Sophie exclaimed, then signed, "You're a good teacher." "You're a good student," Antonio signed back, then typed on his phone, "Learning is more fun when you have someone to share it with." "Antonio, will you help me learn about computers? Mama says you know everything about technology." Gabrielle approached their table with sweet tea for all 3 of them. "Sophie, don't bother Antonio with more requests. He already does so much." "It's not a bother," Antonio typed. "I'd love to teach her about computers. Maybe we could start with some basic programming concepts." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Really? I could learn to make computer programs?" "Absolutely. Some of the best programmers I know started learning when they were your age." Gabrielle settled into her usual seat beside them. "That's very kind of you to offer." Antonio looked at her directly as he typed, "Sophie reminds me why I fell in love with technology in the first place. The joy of creating something new, solving puzzles, making things work better. I'd forgotten that excitement until I started seeing it through her eyes. Tell me about when you first got interested in computers, Gabrielle said, genuinely curious about Antonio's background. Antonio's face brightened as he typed. I was 10 years old. My neighbor had an old computer he was throwing away, and my father said I could have it if I could figure out how to make it work. I spent 3 weeks taking it apart and putting it back together until it finally turned on. What did you do when it worked? Sophie asked. I wrote my first program. It was simple, just made the computer display, "Hello, Sophie," on the screen over and over. Antonio paused, then typed. Of course it didn't say Sophie back then. But now when I think about that first program, that's what I remember. Sophie giggled and signed, That's sweet. Gabrielle felt her heart flutter at Antonio's thoughtfulness. Over the past months, she'd watched him grow from the isolated, frightened man she'd first met into someone who brought joy and stability to her daughter's life, and increasingly to her own. Mama, can Antonio come to my school presentation next week? Sophie asked suddenly. I'm doing my project about sign language and I want to show everyone how we talk together. Gabrielle hesitated. As much as she'd come to care for Antonio, she was still protective of Sophie's world outside the restaurant. Honey, Antonio might be busy. I'd be honored to attend, Antonio typed immediately. If you're comfortable with me being there. Please, Mama? All the other kids will bring their parents or grandparents. I want to bring Antonio because he's special to our family. The word family hung in the air between them. Gabrielle looked at Antonio, seeing vulnerability in his eyes as he waited for her answer. Of course you can come, Gabrielle said softly. Sophie's right. You are special to our family. Antonio's smile was radiant. He typed, I've never been to a school presentation. I'm excited and honored. Later that evening, after Sophie had finished her homework and was playing quietly with coloring books, Gabrielle and Antonio sat together in comfortable silence. The restaurant's dinner rush was winding down, leaving them with peaceful moments to simply enjoy each other's company. Can I ask you something personal? Gabrielle said quietly. Antonio nodded. Do you ever miss your old life? The business success, the excitement of running a company? Antonio considered her question carefully before typing. I thought I missed it. But sitting here with you and Sophie, I realize what I actually missed was feeling purposeful and connected. I have that now in ways I never had before, even when I could speak. Sophie adores you, Gabrielle said. She talks about you constantly. Her teachers say she's been teaching other students sign language because she wants them to understand how wonderful communication can be in any form. She's changed my life, Antonio typed. You both have. I've been thinking. He paused, seeming to gather courage. I've been thinking that maybe I should start participating in the world again. Not go back to my old life but build a new one. Maybe work with programs that teach technology to kids, or support literacy initiatives. Gabrielle reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. I think that sounds wonderful. You have so much to offer. Antonio turned his hand palm up and intertwined their fingers. I never thought I'd feel hopeful about the future again. Thank you for helping me remember that life can be beautiful, even when it's different from what you planned. As they sat together, hands joined, watching Sophie color pictures of families and houses and flowers, Gabrielle realized that her own future was beginning to look different from what she'd planned. And for the first time since Sophie's father had left them 3 years ago, different felt like it might be exactly what they both needed. Word of Antonio's generosity had spread throughout the neighborhood like ripples across a still pond. What started as whispered conversations between regular customers had grown into something larger. A community discovering that miracles sometimes appeared in the form of quiet businessmen who communicated through kindness rather than words. The first person to approach Antonio directly was Mrs. Patricia Williams, an elderly woman who cleaned offices at night to support her grandson's education. She found him at table 6 on a Thursday evening, nervously clutching a stack of medical bills. Mr. Rossi, she began hesitantly, I hope you don't mind me bothering you. Antonio looked up from helping Sophie practice multiplication tables and gestured for Mrs. Williams to join them. He typed quickly, Please sit down. How can I help? People are saying you've been helping folks around here. My grandson Kevin, he's real smart, wants to go to college to study engineering. But I got these medical bills from when I had pneumonia last month, and I don't see how we can afford both his schooling and my medicine. Sophie looked up from her math worksheet. Mrs. Williams, Kevin is in the grade above me at school. He builds robots and teaches kids about science. Antonio studied the medical bills Mrs. Williams had placed on the table. The amounts were substantial, especially for someone living on a cleaner's salary. He typed, "Kevin sounds like exactly the kind of student who should pursue engineering. May I help with both your medical expenses and his education costs?" Mrs. Williams' eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Mr. Rossi, I couldn't possibly accept such generosity." "Why not?" Sophie asked innocently. "Antonio likes helping people learn things. It makes him happy." Gabrielle, who had been listening from the next table, approached quietly. "Mrs. Williams, I've learned that sometimes accepting help is the kindest thing you can do for the person offering it." Antonio nodded and typed, "Sophie and Gabrielle taught me that receiving kindness gracefully is just as important as giving it." Mrs. Williams wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. "I don't know how to thank you." "Introduce me to Kevin," Antonio typed. "I'd like to meet this young engineer." Within days, Kevin Williams became a regular visitor to Table 6, bringing his robotics projects to show Antonio and discuss engineering concepts. His enthusiasm reminded Antonio of his own childhood fascination with technology, and he found himself looking forward to their conversations about circuits and programming. Father Michael O'Connor was next to approach. The Irish priest who ran the community center had heard about Antonio's help with the restaurant and Mrs. Williams' situation. He arrived one evening with blueprints tucked under his arm. "Mr. Rossi, I hate to impose," Father O'Connor began, "but I'm hoping you might consider helping with our youth center expansion." Antonio examined the blueprints, which showed plans for a computer lab and tutoring center. He typed, "This looks wonderful. What kind of help do you need?" "Funding for the construction and equipment. We want to provide technology education and homework support for kids in the neighborhood, but the diocese budget can only cover basic operations." Sophie peered at the blueprints with interest. "Father O'Connor, will kids learn to use computers like Antonio is teaching me?" "That's exactly the idea, Sophie. We want every child to have access to technology education, regardless of their family's financial situation." Antonio studied the plans more carefully, noting the thoughtful design that would accommodate children of different ages and skill levels. He typed, "I'd be honored to fund this project completely. When can construction begin?" Father O'Connor's face lit up with joy. "Bless you, Mr. Rossi. This will change so many young lives." As word of Antonio's generosity continued to spread, more people approached with genuine needs. A single mother whose car had broken down, preventing her from getting to work. A veteran struggling with both physical disabilities and financial hardship. A teacher who wanted to buy books for students whose families couldn't afford them. Each request was met with the same response: grateful acceptance and immediate action to help. Are you seeing how one act of kindness can transform an entire community? Stories like this remind us that compassion is contagious. Subscribe for more heartwarming tales, and tell us in the comments about a time when someone's kindness changed your life. Tommy Chin watched the parade of visitors to Table 6 with amazement. "Elena," he said to Mrs. Rodriguez one evening, "that man is becoming the guardian angel of this neighborhood." Elena nodded, observing Antonio as he listened to yet another person's story. "He's not just giving money, Tommy. He's giving dignity. Look how he treats everyone with the same respect, whether they're asking for help with medical bills or just wanting to say thank you. The way he includes everyone in conversations even when they don't know sign language," Tommy observed. "He types everything out so they feel heard and understood." Gabrielle noticed the same thing. Antonio never made people feel like charity cases. Instead, he approached each situation as an opportunity for mutual connection. When he helped Kevin with engineering concepts, he also learned about the teenagers' innovative approaches to robotics. When he funded the community center expansion, he asked Father O'Connor to teach him about effective youth mentoring. "You're not just changing lives," Gabrielle told Antonio one evening after the latest visitor had left Table 6 with grateful tears. "You're building relationships." "That's what I needed most," Antonio typed. "Not just to give help but to receive connection in return. Every person who trusts me with their story gives me something valuable, the chance to be useful again." Sophie, who had witnessed every interaction, looked up from her homework and signed, "Antonio, I think kindness is like my math problems. When you share it, it multiplies instead of subtracts." Antonio laughed, a silent chuckle that shook his shoulders, and signed back, "That's the smartest thing anyone has ever said about kindness." As the evening wound down and the restaurant prepared to close, Antonio looked around at the community that had embraced him so completely. 3 months ago, he'd been an isolated man having panic attacks in public. Now he was surrounded by neighbors who brought him their hopes, dreams, and challenges because they trusted his heart. Gabrielle squeezed his hand gently. "Ready to go home?" For the first time since his accident, Antonio realized that home wasn't the empty mansion waiting for him across town. Home was this table, these people, this sense of belonging that had grown from Sophie's simple act of compassion into something that encompassed an entire community. He typed, "I'm already home." The first sign of trouble came in the form of a newspaper article with the headline, "Mysterious Millionaire's Motives. Local Businessman's Charitable Spree Raises Questions." The reporter had somehow discovered Antonio's identity and net worth, turning his quiet generosity into public speculation. Gabrielle read the article with growing dismay while Antonio sat silently across from her at table 6. Sophie was at school, unaware that their peaceful world was about to be disrupted by unwanted attention. "Listen to this," Gabrielle said, reading aloud. "Antonio Rossi, whose tech company Rostech Solutions was valued at over $200 million before he stepped down as CEO, has been spotted regularly at a modest family restaurant, reportedly paying for extensive renovations and providing financial assistance to local residents. Sources question whether this sudden philanthropic behavior represents genuine charity or a calculated public relations campaign designed to rebuild his image after years of reclusiveness." Antonio typed on his phone, "I never wanted publicity. How did they find out about the private help I've been giving people?" "Someone must have talked to the press," Gabrielle said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "But who would do that?" Their answer came later that evening when Mrs. Patterson, a woman Antonio had helped with her husband's medical expenses, approached their table with an apologetic expression. "Mr. Rossi, I'm so sorry. A reporter called me yesterday asking about you. I thought it would be good for people to know about your kindness, so I told her about how you helped us. I didn't know she was going to write such a terrible article." Antonio typed reassuringly, "You meant well, Mrs. Patterson. Don't worry about it." But worry was exactly what Gabrielle felt as she watched Antonio's discomfort with the attention. He'd shared his story of isolation and panic attacks, his difficulty connecting with people after his accident. This kind of public scrutiny was the opposite of what he needed. The situation worsened over the following days. Television news crews appeared outside the restaurant, hoping to interview Antonio. Reporters called Mrs. Rodriguez constantly, asking intrusive questions about Antonio's behavior and motivations. Social media buzzed with opinions from people who'd never met him, some praising his generosity while others suggested darker motives. "Gold digger alert," read one online comment about Gabrielle that made her stomach turn. "Pretty single mom targets rich guy who can't defend himself verbally." Sophie came home from school with questions that broke Gabrielle's heart. "Mama, why are kids at school saying you're only nice to Antonio because he has lots of money? That's not true, right?" "Of course it's not true, baby," Gabrielle assured her daughter. "We care about Antonio because he's kind and smart and he's our friend." But doubt crept into Gabrielle's mind despite her reassurances to Sophie. She began noticing how people stared at them when they were together, whispering behind their hands. Some longtime customers at the restaurant now looked at her with suspicion, as if her friendship with Antonio was somehow calculated rather than genuine. The pressure intensified when Antonio's former business partner, Richard Cross, appeared at the restaurant unannounced. Gabrielle recognized him from photos in the news articles as a man in an expensive gray suit who demanded to speak with Antonio privately. Antonio typed his response for Gabrielle to read aloud, "Anything you want to say to me can be said in front of Gabrielle and Sophie." "This is ridiculous, Tony," Richard said, using a nickname that made Antonio visibly uncomfortable. "You're embarrassing yourself and the company with this charity nonsense. Playing house with a waitress and her kid isn't going to bring back your voice or fix what happened to you." Sophie looked up from her coloring book with wide eyes. "Antonio isn't playing. He's our real friend." Richard ignored Sophie and continued speaking to Antonio. "The board wants you to resume active leadership. Your little breakdown is over. It's time to rejoin the real world and stop this pathetic attempt at finding meaning in a small-town restaurant." Antonio's hands trembled as he typed, "I found more meaning here in 3 months than I had in 10 years of running that company." "Because you're hiding from reality," Richard pressed. "These people don't care about you, Tony. They care about your money. And when the novelty wears off, you'll be left with nothing but empty bank accounts and disappointed expectations." Gabrielle stood up slowly, her voice steady but firm. "Mr. Cross, I think you should leave now." "See?" Richard gestured toward her. "She's already protective of the golden goose." The cruel comment hit its mark. Gabrielle felt heat rise in her cheeks as doubt and hurt warred in her chest. Was that really how the world saw their relationship? As a calculated scheme rather than genuine affection? Antonio rose from his chair and typed rapidly, "You're wrong about everything that matters. These people showed me kindness when I was at my lowest point. They welcomed me without knowing about my money. They cared about me when I couldn't speak for myself. That's worth more than any business success." "You're deluding yourself," Richard said coldly. "When the media attention dies down and the gratitude runs out, you'll see what these relationships really are." After Richard left, the restaurant felt different. The easy comfort that had defined their evenings together was replaced by tension and unspoken doubts. "Maybe we should take a break from seeing each other so often," Gabrielle said quietly. "Give the media attention time to die down." Antonio typed frantically, "Is that what you want? Or are you letting other people's opinions change how you feel?" Gabrielle looked at Sophie, who was watching their conversation with concern, then back at Antonio. "I don't know anymore. I just want to protect Sophie from all this negativity." "I understand," Antonio typed, but his eyes showed deep hurt. "I never wanted to bring trouble into your lives." As they parted that evening with awkward goodbyes instead of their usual warm farewells, Gabrielle wondered if Richard Cross might be right. Maybe she had been naive to think their connection could survive the scrutiny of the outside world. But as she tucked Sophie into bed that night, her daughter asked the question that would haunt her dreams. "Mama, if we stop being friends with Antonio because other people are mean, doesn't that mean the mean people win?" The crisis came on a gray October morning when Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at the restaurant to find an official notice taped to the front door. Harrison Development Group had filed a lawsuit claiming the building violated new zoning regulations and demanding immediate closure pending a compliance review that could take months. 37 years I've run this place," Elena sobbed as she showed the legal documents to Gabrielle and Tommy. "Now they're saying we have to close while they study whether our building meets regulations that didn't exist when I opened." Gabrielle read through the legal paperwork with growing alarm. Harrison Development had been trying to buy the block for years, planning to demolish the older buildings and construct a shopping complex. The timing of their lawsuit, just weeks after the media attention about Antonio's generosity, seemed too convenient to be coincidental. "They're using the publicity against us," Tommy said grimly. "All those news stories about the restaurant improvements probably gave them ammunition to claim we're operating outside original permit guidelines." The phone rang constantly with reporters wanting to cover the Mute Millionaire's restaurant closing as a human interest story. Elena fielded calls from loyal customers devastated by the closure notice, while Gabrielle tried to maintain normalcy for Sophie, who didn't yet understand the full implications of the legal challenge. Antonio arrived that evening to find the dining room dark and chairs stacked on empty tables. He knocked on the locked front door until Elena let him inside, her eyes red from crying. He typed immediately, "Tell me everything. How can I help?" "You've done enough," Elena said wearily. "This lawsuit probably happened because of all the attention your generosity brought us. Maybe it's better if you step away now before the media makes things worse." The words hit Antonio like a physical blow. He typed desperately, "You don't mean that. This is my home too." Gabrielle emerged from the kitchen where she'd been packing up personal items. The sight of Antonio's distressed face made her heart ache, but the pressure of recent weeks had taken its toll on her courage. "Elena's right," she said quietly. "Your presence here has complicated everything. Sophie's getting teased at school because kids say I'm dating you for money. Reporters won't leave us alone. Now we might lose the restaurant entirely. Where's Sophie?" Antonio typed. "Let me explain to her that I never meant for any of this to happen. She's at my mother's house. I think it's better if we don't involve her in this situation anymore," Gabrielle replied, each word feeling like a betrayal even as she spoke it. Antonio stared at her in disbelief, then typed, "You're giving up on us because other people spread lies?" "I'm protecting my daughter," Gabrielle snapped, her own pain making her defensive. "Something I should have done from the beginning instead of letting her get attached to someone whose world is so different from ours." The cruelty of her words hung in the air between them. Antonio's face went pale as he realized that the fears Richard Cross had planted were taking root, poisoned by pressure and doubt. He typed slowly, 3 months ago, Sophie saved my life by seeing me as a person worth helping. Tonight, you're telling me I'm not worth the trouble I've caused. Which version of your family should I believe?" Before Gabrielle could respond, the front door burst open and Sophie ran inside, followed by Gabrielle's mother. "Mama, Grandma told me about the restaurant closing," Sophie said, tears streaming down her face. "She said some people are trying to take our place away. But Antonio can fix it, right? He fixes everything." Antonio knelt to Sophie's level and signed gently, "Sometimes problems are too big for one person to fix, even with lots of money. But you won't leave us, will you? Sophie signed back. Even if the restaurant has to close, we'll still be friends, right? Gabrielle watched Antonio's face as he struggled to answer her daughter's question. She saw the depth of his love for Sophie, his genuine desire to protect her from disappointment, and his willingness to sacrifice his own happiness for their well-being. Your mama thinks it might be better if I stay away for a while, Antonio signed carefully. To keep you safe from people who say mean things. Sophie looked between Antonio and her mother with 7-year-old clarity. Mama, are you telling Antonio to go away because you're scared? The simple question cut through all of Gabrielle's defensive arguments. Was she protecting Sophie, or was she protecting herself from the risk of loving someone whose life came with complications she hadn't anticipated? I'm trying to do what's best, Gabrielle said weakly. What's best is keeping our family together, Sophie declared with surprising firmness. Antonio is part of our family. Families don't give up on each other when things get hard. Elena, who had been listening to this exchange, suddenly straightened her shoulders. The little one is right. We don't give up. Antonio, you said you wanted to help. What can we do about this lawsuit? Antonio looked at Gabrielle, waiting for her permission to re-enter the fight. She realized that her next words would determine not only the fate of the restaurant, but the future of the relationships that had become the most important part of all their lives. I'm sorry, she whispered, not just to Antonio but to herself for nearly throwing away something precious because others couldn't see its value. I was scared and I took that fear out on you. That was wrong. Antonio typed, fear is understandable. But hiding from it doesn't make it go away. Sophie moved to stand between her mother and Antonio, taking both their hands. We fight together, right? That's what families do. As Gabrielle looked at her daughter's determined face and Antonio's hopeful eyes, she realized that Sophie had been right from the very beginning. Real families didn't abandon each other when the world got complicated. They fought back together. The courtroom was packed with an unlikely mixture of expensive suits and everyday working clothes. On one side sat Harrison Development's team of corporate lawyers, confident in their legal strategy to force the restaurant's closure. On the other side, Antonio had assembled a different kind of army, the community that Rossi's family restaurant had served for 37 years. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, clutching Kevin's hand as the engineering student prepared to testify about how Antonio's mentorship had changed his educational trajectory. Father O'Connor wore his formal clerical collar, ready to speak about the positive community impact of the restaurant and its recent improvements. Tommy Chen had closed his other catering commitments to be present, and dozens of regular customers had taken time off work to support Elena Rodriguez. Sophie sat between Gabrielle and Antonio, wearing her brightest red dress and practicing the sign language presentation she'd insisted on giving to the judge. I want to tell everyone how talking with hands can help people understand each other better, she'd explained to Antonio the night before. The defense strategy was simple but powerful. Demonstrate that Rossi's family restaurant wasn't just a business, but a community institution whose loss would devastate the neighborhood. Antonio had hired the best legal team money could buy, not to intimidate the opposition, but to ensure every voice would be heard clearly. Harrison Development's lawyer presented their case with cold efficiency, citing zoning violations and permit technicalities. They painted the restaurant as an outdated establishment that stood in the way of modern progress and economic development. Your Honor, the corporate lawyer concluded, while we sympathize with the sentimental attachment some residents have to this establishment, the law is clear. The building modifications made without proper permits require immediate review and probable closure. But when Antonio's legal team presented their defense, the courtroom atmosphere transformed. Instead of dry legal arguments, they told human stories. Kevin Williams took the stand and spoke about how Antonio's engineering mentorship had helped him earn a full scholarship to Georgia Tech. Mr. Rossi didn't just help pay for my education. He helped me believe I could succeed in fields I never thought were possible for someone from my neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson testified about how Antonio's assistance with medical bills had allowed her to keep working and maintain her dignity. He didn't just write a check. He listened to my story, treated me with respect, and helped me keep my family together. Father O'Connor described the community center's new computer lab and the dozens of children learning technology skills they'd never have accessed otherwise. Mr. Rossi's generosity created opportunities that will benefit this neighborhood for generations. Elena Rodriguez spoke last among the character witnesses, her voice strong despite her nervousness. Rossi's family restaurant has been my life's work. But in the past few months, watching Antonio become part of our community, I've learned that a restaurant's true value isn't in its building or its profits. It's in the connections it creates between people who might never have met otherwise. Then Sophie took the stand. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, softened immediately as the 7-year-old approached the witness chair. Sophie had insisted on testifying in both spoken words and sign language, with Antonio serving as her translator. "Your Honor," Sophie began, her small voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "my name is Sophie Thompson, and I want to tell you about my friend Antonio." She proceeded to explain, with the clarity that only children possess, how sign language had allowed her to help someone who needed a friend. She demonstrated basic signs for the court, explaining how communication could happen in many different ways. "Antonio teaches me that being different doesn't mean being less important," Sophie said, signing as she spoke. "Our restaurant is different from big fancy places, but it's not less important. It's where people become families." The judge watched intently as Sophie signed the words for community, kindness, and home. "When Antonio first came to our restaurant, he was very sad and scared. But Mama and I helped him feel better, and then he helped make our whole neighborhood better. That's what families do. They help each other." Sophie looked directly at the judge with 7-year-old confidence. "Your Honor, if you close our restaurant, you're not just closing a building. You're closing the place where all our families come together." The courtroom was silent as Sophie returned to her seat between Gabrielle and Antonio. The corporate lawyers seemed uncertain how to respond to a child's testimony about the emotional and social value of a community gathering place. Antonio stood to address the court himself. His lawyer had prepared a typed statement, but Antonio set it aside and began signing, speaking through the court interpreter. "Your Honor, I came to Rossi's family restaurant 3 months ago as a broken man who had given up on connecting with other people. I left my successful business because I couldn't find meaning in work that only benefited shareholders rather than communities." He paused, looking at Gabrielle and Sophie, then continued signing. "This restaurant saved my life, not through the food it serves, but through the family it helped me find. Elena Rodriguez has operated this establishment legally and ethically for 37 years. The improvements I funded were all properly permitted and inspected. Harrison Development's lawsuit is an attempt to use legal technicalities to destroy something valuable that cannot be replaced." Antonio looked directly at the Harrison Development lawyers. "I understand the appeal of modern shopping complexes and standardized businesses. But communities also need places where a 7-year-old girl can teach a grown man that kindness is a language everyone can learn to speak." The judge retired for less than an hour before returning with her decision. "Having reviewed all testimony and evidence," she announced, "I find that Harrison Development Group's claims lack sufficient merit to warrant closure of Rossi's family restaurant. All building modifications were properly permitted and inspected. More importantly, this court recognizes the significant community value this establishment provides." She looked directly at Sophie and Antonio. "Young lady, your testimony reminded me why we have laws to protect community institutions, not just business interests. Mr. Rossi, your commitment to this neighborhood demonstrates that true success is measured not just in financial terms, but in positive human impact." The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Elena Rodriguez wept with relief, while Tommy Chin pumped his fist in victory. Kevin Williams hugged Mrs. Patterson, and Father O'Connor offered prayers of gratitude. But the most meaningful moment came when Sophie stood on her chair and signed to the entire courtroom, "We won because we stayed together." 6 months later, Rossi's family restaurant hosted its first official wedding reception. Antonio and Gabrielle had been married in a simple ceremony at the community center, with Father O'Connor performing the service and Sophie serving as the flower girl who signed the wedding vows alongside the spoken words. The restaurant's private dining room had been decorated with flowers in bright red, blue and green, Sophie's favorite colors. 3 long tables accommodated the extended family that had grown around the original core. Elena and Tommy, Mrs. Patterson and Kevin, Father O'Connor, Dr. Patricia Kim who had helped Antonio explore voice therapy options, and dozens of community members whose lives had been touched by the kindness that started with a little girl's compassion. Antonio wore a navy blue suit and a smile that hadn't left his face since Gabrielle accepted his proposal, which he'd made in sign language while Sophie translated for the entire restaurant on Valentine's Day. Gabrielle glowed in a bright green dress that complemented her radiant happiness as she moved between tables, ensuring every guest felt welcomed and celebrated. Sophie, now 8 years old and the restaurant's unofficial sign language teacher, had started a program where she taught basic signs to other children in the neighborhood. She wore a red dress that twirled perfectly when she demonstrated the signs for joy, celebration, and forever family. As the evening wound down, Antonio stood to address their wedding guests. He'd been working with Dr. Kim on voice therapy, and while his speech was still limited, he could now speak short sentences on special occasions. "Thank you," he said aloud, his voice rough but clear, then continued in sign language with Sophie translating. "Sophia taught me that communication happens through kindness, not just words. Gabrielle taught me that love means accepting help as gracefully as you give it. This community taught me that home isn't a place you find, it's a family you build together." He looked at his new wife and daughter, then at the faces of the people who had become his chosen family. From a little girl who saw someone who needed help, to a mother who welcomed a stranger, to a community that embraced someone different, you all saved my life. Now let me spend the rest of it showing you how grateful I am. Elena Rodriguez raised her glass of champagne. To Antonio and Gabrielle Rossi, and to little Sophie who started it all. May your family continue to grow in love, kindness and joy. As glasses clinked and laughter filled the air, Antonio pulled his phone from his pocket one last time. But instead of typing a message, he set it aside and took Gabrielle's hand, then reached for Sophie's hand with his other. For the first time in years he had no need for words. The love surrounding him at table 6 in Rossi's family restaurant spoke a language that everyone in the room understood perfectly. Outside, the neon sign flickered warmly in the evening air, Rossi's family restaurant, where everyone belongs. And inside, at a table decorated with bright flowers and filled with laughter, a mute millionaire had found his voice through the power of a community that chose love over fear, understanding over judgment, and inclusion over isolation. The little girl who had started it all with simple signs for, "Are you okay?" now sat between her new father and her mother, teaching the wedding guests her favorite sign of all. 2 hands pressed together over the heart, the universal symbol for family. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who had chosen to love each other across differences of background, wealth and ability, everyone understood that they had witnessed something far more valuable than any business success story. They had witnessed the birth of a family built on the foundation that Sophie had always known to be true. Kindness is the language that everyone can speak, and love multiplies when it's shared.